often do you hear gunshots?
Too often.
Okay. What's the neighborhood like?
Like a bad neighborhood.
In February of 2003, television lost an icon. Fred Rogers, creator, writer, puppeteer, most well known for his show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that ran for 34 years on PBS. Fred Rogers, with 40 honorary degrees from colleges and universities. Fred Rogers, the recipient of television's Peabody Award, and Fred Rogers, the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That Fred Rogers succumbed to stomach cancer 15 years ago. And I would argue that it has taken 15 years and a generation of elementary-aged children growing up without that familiar refrain of, "Won't you be my neighbor?" to finally inform us of what we truly lost with his passing. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the documentary titled "Won't You Be My Neighbor" that has just made its way to cinemas and received unanimous praise. Also, a feature film starring Tom Hanks as Fred Rogers is scheduled to release in 2019. What was it about an unassuming ordained Presbyterian minister from Pittsburgh who despised television that caused him to become the leading voice to children's educational programming? On paper, nothing about Fred Rogers or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood should have worked. But somehow a quiet-natured, earnest, nurturing man dressed in sweaters and ties spoke to and spoke for generations of children for over 3 decades. Let's take a look at a significant moment in Fred Rogers' legacy. It's a video that many of you have already seen. May 1st, 1969. Fred Rogers appears before the Senate Subcommittee on Communications. See, President Nixon's efforts to support action in the Vietnam War called for federal funds to be trimmed from other programs. In this case, Fred Rogers had to argue to get $20 million back for the budget of PBS, and he had only 6 minutes to do it.
I trust what you have said, that you will read this. It's very important to me. I care deeply about children. My first children...
Will it make you happy if you read it?
I'd just like to talk about it, if it's all right.
Sir.
Initially, the senator bristles impatiently, listening to Fred Rogers. But you know how it ends. Mr. Rogers wins him and the committee over.
Looks like you just earned the $20 million.
How did he do it? I think it would be an understatement to describe Mr. Rogers as meek, whereas Senator John O. Pastore, on the other side of the political aisle, was described by colleagues as gruff and impatient. So, how does a meek minister persuade an impatient politician with a war to fund? Well, looking at the hundreds of recorded interactions that Mr. Rogers had with children and adults alike over the years, I would safely make this assertion. He didn't have to. He didn't have to persuade him. Mr. Rogers was simply honest, earnest, sincere. He didn't have glitz or glamour and certainly didn't bring a sales pitch. Fred Rogers spoke in the same honest, unassuming, and unhurried tone that he used with well, everyone. And for some, that tone was strange. It was strange because it was disarming, and it was disarming because it was honest. And let's not forget that Mr. Rogers was a Presbyterian minister who was well acquainted with the book of Mark, chapter 12, where Jesus says that the second greatest of all the commands is to love your neighbor as yourself. Do not doubt that Mr. Rogers had that verse in mind when he asked us again and again, "Won't you be my neighbor?" But something else happened in that video, something that by today's standards we'd consider truly remarkable. If you're not careful, you'll miss it. It's not anything that Fred Rogers is saying or doing. It's the senator. Did you see it? He's listening. That's right, listening. When was the last time you saw one of these subcommittee dog and pony shows where the players were actually listening to one another? No matter how compelling the story may be, it's all for nothing if no one is listening. No matter the spectacle or the sincerity of the message, the power comes from those who are willing to hear, willing to receive. I think that's why we lament the absence of Mr. Rogers now more than ever. The art of listening has never been popular. The art of rhetoric has always been popular. The art of righteous anger is also enjoying a heyday, and the art of trolling too. Then there's also the art of the deal, the art of the steal, and the classic, the art of war. But at least listening had its champion. His whole demeanor invited us to listen to one another, to listen to our community, to our world, and not to be scared, but to listen, to understand, to listen to those who were not like us and to those who are like us. And because of him, whole generations of children grew into adults that could sing along to the question,
Please won't you be my neighbor?
and then listen for an answer. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll subscribe, and if you have friends that grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood like I did, tell them to check out this video. Just copy the link in a text or an email and spread the word. Also, if you happen to be one of the many that saw the documentary in cinemas, be sure to leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts, okay? I'd love to hear what you think. Bye for now.